Hi, my name is Anne-Aelis and I've recently completed the class Java Programming as part of a Master of Computer Science at Monash University in Australia. In terms of prior coding experience, my bachelor's degree was in pure maths, and in that particular course I only did an introduction to Python class and some MATLAB, but that was a while ago, around 8 or so years. In my professional life, I work with SQL or SQL or whatever you'd like to call it, and in Python. I also spent a year in a big data team where we worked in Spark Scala. This Java programming class was my first formal introduction to object-oriented programming. It was a difficult class, but I really enjoyed it, and in less than 10 minutes, here is what I learned. In terms of the course content, the first thing I'll say is that the materials that were provided were really excellent. They were very clear, very well written. Our first module was an introduction, so we looked at program compilation and execution, we looked at data types and operators, and then we began to talk about key concepts in object-oriented programming, and we covered variables and methods. In Module 2, we started working with classes and objects and relational and logical operators. We also began talking about coding quality and responsibility-driven design. In Module 3, we covered class-object interactions, we spoke about documentation and the class libraries available to us. We also spoke about string buffer classes, and then we covered identity, state, and equality. We finished that module with a discussion around testing, so positive tests and negative tests, identifying errors, and debugging our code. In Module 4, we worked with iteration, collections, class variables and methods, and constants. In Module 5, we looked at exception handling, file I/O, and class documentation. We discussed using class diagrams and good software development and design. The final module, we looked at inheritance and polymorphism, and we discussed how to assess code quality. Personally, I would have introduced inheritance and polymorphism sooner in the course, and I would have included more discussion about Java, when to use it, when is it the best choice. I also think we could have covered more discussion around object-oriented programming as a paradigm, comparing and contrasting it to other paradigms like functional, procedural, declarative, and whatever else you might find out there in the wild. In terms of the structure, we had 2 lectures a week, so a little bit more intense this time around, and we also had quite a few practice tasks to complete. As for the assessment, we had 3 coding challenges that varied between 1.5 to 2.5 hours long. These were really hard. There was a lot of questions to code up in a very short amount of time once you broke it down across the various questions. And our final assessment was a game, which is a classic for anyone that's ever done this sort of a programming class. For our game, we had a really long list of requirements. Sometimes it was a bit vague, which I think is a pretty apt reflection of the real world. We had to provide a test class as well as test documentation. We had to provide a class diagram to justify the design choices for our game. And we also had to make a little video demonstrating all the functionality of the code, so proving that you could play the game as it was intended. This assessment it took a lot of time to do, but it was really fun. I got to be very creative. The approach I took was first I planned, and then I got all the functionality working, and then I pretty much just iterated and refactored until the cows came home. I probably averaged about 15 to 20 hours work / study across all the weeks in this course. It was clear that the teachers in this course knew what they were talking about, and their main focus was to get us to do as much hands-on programming as was possible. In terms of ways of working, all the code challenges and the final assessment were done through Monash's platform. This platform is not the worst, but there is no interactive version control. So when it came to coding up the game, our final assessment, I was also on a lot of international flights, so I couldn't get online to the platform. And so what I did is I did all my programming in VS Code, and I managed version control through my own GitHub repository. This was a much better way of working. It was very helpful for setting up linting, for example. Doing my class diagram was much easier because it's just a much better visual representation of your code, and I think I was able to save time and work a lot more productively because I chose to work this way. So I will summarize in a minute, but there is a question that I might preempt. When I was doing this course, quite a few of my friends asked me, were you allowed to use ChatGPT? So when it came to the coding challenges and anything that was accessible, of course the university policy was no. However, as a learning tool, and if you'd like to synthesize some of the key concepts, for example, if you want to identify what's the difference between an error in Java and an exception, you could ask ChatGPT and then it would give you a really lovely summary with some sample code. And therefore, I think that it has a lot of value as a pedagogical tool. So all in all, I really enjoyed this class, Java programming. I am happy with my grade. I got a HD, and I'm really hoping I'll have an opportunity to code in Java sometime soon. It's wonderful that this course is already helping me in my job, but it's also helping me understand the world around me. So for example, the previous subject I completed in this Master of Computer Science was Architecture and Networks. So among other things, we studied the physical internet and deep sea cables. And just a month ago, I was in Taiwan and I met a couple of China correspondents and journalists over there. And it was fascinating to be able to chat with them about deep sea cables in the region. And I find this so wonderful to be able to have that crossover between things like this technical subject that we're covering at university, but also the wider world around me. So that's super cool, super happy that I'm learning these things. Our next course is databases, so we'll see how that goes, and we'll probably film an update for that as well.